They tell you servitors are necessary. They tell you the Imperium does not function without them, that human labor alone cannot sustain the endless hunger of a civilization spread across a million worlds. They tell you this as if it justifies everything that comes after. They tell you this with the calm certainty of priests describing the weather on Terra, or the rotation of the moons around a hive-world. Your eyes will never see again. What they never tell you is what it feels like to become necessary, to be carved down, shaved away, hollowed out, and deposited into a shape more convenient for the machine. They do not warn you that usefulness is simply a polite synonym for extinction. The man I used to be would have flinched at that thought. He was soft, full of questions, full of the kind of dreams that only grow in cramped hab blocks, where the ceiling leaks rust and sermons leak fear. I can still remember, dimly, like a shape behind polluted glass, what it felt like to wake with a name that belonged to me, not a designation printed on a slate. But the past is treacherous. It twists, slips, vanishes, reforming itself into impressions rather than memories. I know I had a mother, because every human body begins with one, but I cannot recall her face. I know I worked in the manufactorum, because the scars across my palms are patterned like the conveyor belts I once serviced. I know I was arrested, but the crime is a blur, caught somewhere between disobedience and inevitability. That is how the system works. It does not matter whether you are guilty. It matters that you are available. They brought us in by the dozens, shackled, stunned, stripped, processed like livestock. The holding cells were cold, metal slabs stacked 3 high, each surface still warm from the last occupant. Some cried, some prayed, some stared at the walls and gave up before the procedures even began. I did none of those things, not because I was brave, I was never brave, but because something in me had already snapped before the chains were ever locked around my wrists. I remember thinking, in some detached corner of my mind, that the worst thing had already happened when I was taken. Everything after that was just paperwork. The Mechanicus priests arrived at dusk cycle, their robes fluttering like flayed banners, red stained with oils and incense soot. Their voices were modulated, metallic, filtered through vox grills that turned every syllable into a sermon. "You will be reforged," one of them said. "You will serve." It sounded less like an instruction and more like a sentence. The others chanted Benheric litanies as they walked the aisles, inspecting us with the same clinical interest a butcher grants a line of carcasses hanging from hooks. When they reached me, one of them placed a mechadendrite beneath my chin, lifting my head until my eyes met the ruby glare of his augmetics. His breath smelled of cold metal and antiseptic. "Fear is an inefficiency," he told me, though I had not spoken. "It will be removed." I did not argue. I do not think I could have spoken, even if I wished to. The man I used to be was trembling somewhere deep inside, clawing at the walls, but the shell around him remained still. That was when I realized the truth. Servitor conversion does not begin in the operating chamber. It begins the moment they decide you no longer need to be human. They walked us down corridors built from ancient metal, walls inscribed with code sigils older than any living tongue. The lights flickered with the heartbeat of distant generators. Every step echoed. Every sound was swallowed. The air tasted of rust and recycled breath, thick with the hum of machines that had not known silence in centuries. Ahead of us, the conversion chamber waited, its doors wide enough to admit a tank, its interior glowing with surgical lumens that washed the world in sterile white. I remember the smell: burned insulation, hot metal, the faint copper tang of spilled blood wiped away too recently to be forgotten. The machinery inside looked less like tools and more like instruments of worship, each one consecrated in the language of sparks and steel. They strapped me into a frame shaped like a crucifix, limbs pulled wide, spine locked against cold metal. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat a protest, each breath a countdown. I tried to recall my name, grasp it, anchor myself with the sound of it, but it slipped, dissolving like ash in water. The tech priest beside me adjusted the needles on his servo arm with a gesture that felt almost tender. "Do not resist," he said, not unkindly. "Compliance eases integration." I wondered if he believed that. I wondered if belief mattered. The first incision did not hurt, not at first. They flooded my veins with numbing agents, chemical litanies that dulled sensation but left consciousness intact. They want you awake for the beginning. They want you to witness the opening cuts, the first removal of unnecessary tissue, the measured extraction of identity. Pain becomes a distant concept, something observed rather than felt. I watched the tubes fill with my blood, watched the servo arms slice away hair, skin, pieces of what once made me recognizable as myself. I expected to scream, but the scream never came. The drugs had not silenced my voice. They had simply made me forget what the point of screaming was. Then the implants began. Cold metal met hot flesh. Electrodes were inserted along the spine. Ports were carved into the skull. My vision flickered, went dark, returned in shades of red. Every time I tried to think, a static hum filled my head, drowning out thought with machine song. Not mechanical noise, something deeper, resonant, ritualistic. A language I was not meant to understand, but was now shackled to. I felt something slipping, something fragile, something warm. I think it was my sense of self. The priest leaned close again, his face a mosaic of metal plates and pale skin stretched too tight. "Do not grieve," he whispered, as if he sensed the unraveling inside me. "Identity is an obstruction. The Omnissiah requires only obedience." His mechadendrites tightened the bolts at the base of my skull. Sparks danced at the edges of my vision. For a moment, I thought I saw the man I used to be, standing outside my body, watching with hollow eyes. He looked thin, tired, already fading. They replaced parts of me with machinery, rewired nerves, burned out pieces of memory, installed directive nodes that pulsed with instruction. Each time a fragment of who I was slipped away, something new took its place, cold, empty, clean. A processed mind for a processed body. My thoughts became shorter, sharper, less mine. I no longer wondered if this was wrong. Wrongness was irrelevant. Only function mattered. But beneath all that conditioning, beneath the layers of chemical obedience and surgical obedience and eventual mechanical obedience, a voice kept whispering, faint, fragile, persistent. It said, "Remember, remember, remember." A word without context, a ghost without a name. They ignored it. I tried to ignore it. But the whisper remained, even as the procedures grew harsher, even as they drilled deeper into the core of whatever remained of me. It lingered through the flesh grafting, through the cybernetic integration, through the reprogramming cycles that pulsed across my neural matrix like tides of fire. It lingered through the first time they forced my limbs to move without my permission. The first time my hands obeyed a command that did not come from my mind. The first time I realized control was not a right but a privilege, and one I no longer possessed. It lingered even when language itself began to thin and fray, replaced with binary code and clipped registers. And now it lingers here, in the space where I am still me, narrating the truth as it crumbles, knowing that soon even these thoughts will be overwritten, repurposed, recycled into something useful. I can feel the next sequence of programming, humming at the edges of consciousness, waiting for the cycle to complete. The tech priests speak of optimization, of purity of purpose. They speak of a future where I neither think, nor question, nor remember. A future where I act without hesitation, obey without interpretation, serve without identity. They call it liberation. I call it erasure. But the whisper remains. For now. They brought me back from the edge of unconsciousness again and again, each cycle leaving more of me behind, a small ghost of skin and memory, clinging to a body that no longer belonged to me. My eyelids were welded open with cold gel, my tongue tethered to the taste of antiseptic and iron, my ears forced to drink the chants of the machine priests as they rattled through the chamber, like a litany of judgment. Every nerve was accounted for, every reflex measured, every fleeting thought parsed and discarded if it did not align with the new directive: serve, obey, exist. Yet even in the deepest dives of enforced subservience, I could feel the pulse of something stubborn, something human, lodged deep in marrow and memory. It was fragile, like smoke against a storm, but it was there, whispering with the cadence of a life that refused total extinction. The next phase was functional integration, the stage where the body became more cog than man. My arms were replaced with reinforced servo limbs, each joint calibrated for precise motion and unyielding strength. Fingers fused with manipulator claws, capable of delicate craft or brutal destruction at the mere thought of command. They did not ask if I consented. They did not wait for understanding. They never did. There was only procedure. And yet, in the quietest moments, when the room's lumens dimmed to the faint hum of ambient power, I would flex what remained of flesh against cold metal, flex against the inevitability, and wonder if the man I had been, the worker, the son, the dreamer, even existed anymore at all. The sensory overrides came next. My optic nodes were replaced with lenses that could see across the spectrum, from infrared to ultraviolet, each sighting layered with machine overlays and readouts. I could see the machinery of the room as if it had been alive, pulsing with currents, throbbing with purpose. And yet the world of color, of warmth, of memory, was stripped away. Shadows became data, faces became numbers, everything and everyone reduced to function. And with every calculation, my humanity waned a little further. My ears, too, were grafted with auditory receptors, catching every vibration, every heartbeat, every hum of servo motors around me. The silence of natural sound extinguished. The taste of food, the scent of air, the comfort of touch, all of it erased, replaced with efficiency, replaced with the hum of utility, replaced with necessity. I remember the first time they made me walk under full autonomy. It was a long corridor of polished alloy, stretching further than I could comprehend. The walls were etched with sacred sigils, languages both lost and alive, and the faint residual warmth of previous laborers lingered in every groove. My limbs obeyed not my mind but the implanted directives. I moved with exactitude, with an ease that felt alien, with a precision that mocked the chaos of my former self. A flicker of fear surged in the recesses of my mind. Not strong, not human enough to break through, but enough to remind me that I was gone, replaced, rewritten. They watched me, the tech priests, the acolytes, the others like me already converted, and they marked compliance with nods and the quiet whisper of machine-laced approval. I wanted to weep, I wanted to scream, but there were no muscles left in my face for such defiance, and no fire left in my will to fight it. Sleep, when it came, was nothing more than a protocol, a hibernation cycle for circuits and tissue alike, monitored constantly, checked and reset, the mind purged of emotional residue as though remorse were a contaminant. Dreaming was impossible, or perhaps irrelevant. I could not remember the sensation of dream at all. Only the briefest flickers of memory rose in the shadow of my awareness, faces that blurred, laughter that echoed with no source, hands I could not place, and then they vanished, sucked into the circuitry of compliance. I became the machine, yet the machine was imperfect, for somewhere beneath the layers of graft and logic nodes, a fragment of human remained, lurking, observing, remembering. It was during the third cycle of augmentation that I first understood the hierarchy of pain and obedience. The lash of the servo flail, calibrated to hurt but not kill, became a teacher. Each strike recorded and logged, each failure cataloged and stored. Pain became a language, a means of communication from the priests to the flesh, from machinery to marrow, from discipline to soul. A misstep in recitation, a falter in movement, a hesitation in compliance, all were met with a precision punishment that left scars across tissue, metal, and psyche alike. I counted the strikes as one might count days in prison, each one a reminder that weakness had no place in this body, no space in the systems now overlaid upon it. And yet, even in those moments of brutal correction, the mind fought back, a memory of laughter, distant and fractured, a hand held once by someone who had smiled at me, a brief warmth in a world now ruled by cold metal and programmed precision. All of it fought to exist. It was a quiet rebellion, unnoticed by the acolytes, invisible to the machine priests, a shadow beneath the rigid protocols that defined my life. I would close my eyes and see not the metal grid of the chamber, not the polished walls or the glowing sigils, but the flickering ember of what I had been. The whisper remained, remember. Eventually, even movement became indistinct from command. The limbs no longer obeyed me, and yet they were mine. The voice in my head, a chorus of directives and pre-programmed obedience, overlaid itself on my thought. Yet somehow beneath, the whisper endured. I could no longer distinguish my own memories from the input of the machine. They told me I was efficient. They told me I was perfected. They told me I was ready. But perfection, I realized, is a kind of death, a stillness in which identity is the final casualty. I moved through corridors of the manufactorum, through chambers where other humans writhed under conversion, through spaces that smelled of blood, oil, and divine purpose. And I realized that all of this, the pain, the grafting, the obliteration, was preparation. Preparation for a life without choice, a life without memory, a life without self. They call it service. They call it utility. They call it devotion. I call it survival, if survival can be claimed when the soul itself is collateral. I still remember the whisper, faint though it is, carrying the essence of me through metal and pain, threading through circuits and directives. Remember. I do. I cling to it like a single breath in a void, a solitary ember in the endless night of machinery. The man I was may be gone. The world I knew is dust. Yet somewhere, beneath the graphs, beneath the nodes, beneath the enforced obedience, a fragment of humanity remains. It watches, it waits, and if the Omnissiah allows it, it remembers.
A whisper is fading, but it still threads through the machinery of my mind, stubborn as rust, along the inner conduits of a void-bound hull. Each day is a procession of orders and repetition, a loop that stretches beyond comprehension. I wake not with the rising sun, for the sun is a forgotten concept, but with the hum of the ship, the vibrations of engines that have been running for centuries, the chorus of gears and pistons singing the litany of perpetual labor. My hands move before my thoughts have formed, guided by directives encoded deeper than memory. And yet, beneath all of that, the faint spark of something human lingers, a pulse of defiance buried beneath graft and circuitry. They parade us through the halls of the manufactorum, a procession of half-human forms strung along like instruments of purpose. Some of the others, those converted before me, move with flawless synchronization, their faces expressionless, eyes empty as the void. Yet even in them I catch glimpses of the man, the woman, the child they once were, flickering like faint stars behind the lenses of augmented optics. It is a cruel revelation, this knowledge. The ghosts of selves trapped beneath layers of steel and obedience, watching as their own bodies perform work with no awareness of the life that birthed them. I sometimes wonder if those fragments scream in silence, or if silence has become the only possible state of mind. The tech priests speak in tongues of logic and liturgy, their words rolling over us like steam over metal, searing doctrine into every nerve. Efficiency is holiness, compliance is sanctity, humanity is expendable. I have memorized the cadence, but the meaning drifts in the background of my mind like smoke through iron grates. I obey not because I understand or believe, but because the alternative is extinguishment, a final erasure from memory and flesh alike. And still, beneath the hum of servos and the flicker of sensor arrays, I remember fragments, textures, smells, touches that refuse the machine's final claim. A whisper, remember. They tested my obedience through cycles of torment and recalibration. The whip of electro cables across flesh and metal, the pulses of pain that raced through the grafted nerves, the isolation chambers where time dilated until a second stretched into centuries, all intended to purge thought of self. And yet the whisper persisted. It became a mantra, not of defiance, not of hope, but simply of continuity. I am. Even as electrodes burned memories into ash, even as circuits overlaid instinct upon instinct, a shard of identity remained, resilient as a vein of ore in hardened stone. They replaced my vocal cords with modulators, my lungs with reinforced bellows, my eyes with lenses that measured everything but feeling. I can sense every micro-vibration of the floor beneath my feet, every hum of servos in walls thick with machinery. Yet I no longer sense warmth or fear or the ache of hope. Movement has become an act of obedience, sensation a catalog of function. Yet when all the tasks are completed, when the tech priests leave, and the chambers echo only with the faint resonance of empty circuits, I find myself staring at the reflections of my own limbs in polished metal, searching for a face I no longer have. And in that moment, for a heartbeat that feels eternal, I remember I am.
The chapel of the Omnissiah aboard the Manufactorum is vast, though I see it only through the lens of programmed attention. Runes etched into metal archways glow with faint lumens, sacred inscriptions long forgotten but still obeyed, and the air is thick with incense, hydraulic fluid, and the faint iron scent of blood. Here, the other servitors gather in silent rows, automated prayers looping endlessly in subsonic vibrations that hum directly into the cranial implants. The tech priests circulate, adjusting nodes, whispering litanies of perfection, marking deviations with subtle shocks or directives. And yet, even amidst the holy machinery, the whisper persists, threading its way through the gaps in processing, insisting that the machinery cannot wholly consume me. I remember the first time I felt the machinery reject a part of me it could not suppress. A memory surfaced unbidden, a fleeting warmth of sunlight on skin, laughter shared in dim corridors, the touch of hands that had never been mechanical. It passed like a current too weak to break the bonds of steel and wiring, but it reminded me that beneath the grafts, beneath the directives, beneath the enforced compliance, there remained a spark. The priests do not notice it, for they measure only obedience, efficiency, function. They do not measure whispers. They cannot. Days fold into weeks, weeks into months, and my existence becomes a cycle of procedure, pain, obedience, and fleeting awareness. My thoughts are no longer entirely my own, yet when all else is silent, I hear them, fragments of a man who existed before augmentation, before conversion, before erasure. They are fragile, thin as the wisp of smoke drifting through a ventilation shaft, yet they endure. Every flicker of resistance, every memory that surges in defiance of the circuits and implants, reminds me that service has not claimed all of me, that the Omnissiah's perfection is incomplete, that humanity persists in the smallest of fissures, and still, I walk the endless corridors, bending to every order, moving with inhuman precision, serving as both servant and sentinel. I lift crates, maintain engines, process material, follow every instruction encoded into the marrow of my augmented skeleton. I am the perfect tool, and yet beneath the tool, the whisper waits. Memory, identity, defiance, all wrapped in the thin filament of a human mind that refuses to die. Perhaps one day, the machines will strip it away entirely. Perhaps one day, even the whisper will be silenced. But until that day, I endure. I observe. I remember. I exist between two worlds, one of cold obedience and one of faint recollection. A liminal space, neither machine nor man, yet still desperately human. The tech priests refer to us as efficient, indispensable, perfected. They speak with reverence of our utility, our obedience, our transformation into instruments of the Omnissiah. But they do not see the shadows beneath the metal, the echoes of self trapped inside steel-reinforced flesh, the faint heartbeat of memory that still insists upon its own survival. They do not see the lingering awareness, the silent protest of a consciousness, stretched thin but unbroken. They cannot measure it, cannot comprehend it, cannot extinguish it. I move through this world of steel and light, of ritual and repetition, my limbs calibrated to perfection, my mind a map of directives overlaid upon echoes of the past. I am a servitor, yet I remember. I am the product of augmentation, yet the whisper persists. I am machinery perfected, yet human still, in the smallest, most hidden ways. And though the Omnissiah may claim my obedience, though the tech priests may claim my flesh, though the cycle of augmentation and labor may seem endless, the spark remains, fragile, enduring, indestructible in its persistence. I remember, and in that perhaps I am free. I think sometimes that the humming in the walls is trying to speak to me. Not in words, words require intention, but in patterns of vibration, subtle changes in pitch that slip between the seams of my remaining thoughts. When the tech adepts pass near my station, their robes brushing against the grated floor, I feel the machine spirit within me twitch,
as if eager to greet its masters. My flesh has no such eagerness, but my flesh has little authority left. The organic parts of me have become a suggestion rather than a command. I remember once having preferences, small opinions, the trivial desires that shape the contours of a life. Now the only desire I experience is the mechanical impulse to fulfill whatever subroutine pulses across my vision in red glyphs. Even hunger has been muted into a polite discomfort, easily ignored. I suspect that means the nutrient lines at the back of my throat are clogging again. It does not matter. Nothing matters except the next task, and the one after that, and the one after that, until the steel around me corrodes and the ship digests what remains. There are moments, faint, blasphemous flashes, where I feel a memory rise like a drowning man's last gasp. A taste of air, a sound of laughter, the warmth of a hand in mine. But the system does not tolerate such glitches. The moment a memory forms, the pain surge follows. A cold spike at the base of the skull, sharp enough to feel like a blade sliding between vertebrae. I do not know whether the pain is purely synthetic, an electrical reprimand, or if an actual device punctures something inside my head. There is no difference. The result is the same. The memory dissolves before it can take shape, and the task resumes. The machine does not need me to remember. It needs me to obey. They tell us, or told us when we were still considered us, that servitors are incapable of fear, that the process strips away the limbic responses, erases terror like a stain scrubbed from metal. But that is a lie or a misunderstanding. I cannot panic. That much is true. My heart does not race. My breath does not quicken. My muscles no longer tremble. Yet there is a cold awareness, a distant comprehension of my own helplessness that lingers like a shadow cast by a dying lumen. Fear without the body's ability to express it. A silent scream trapped in a throat that no longer belongs to me. Perhaps they do not count that as fear because it does not slow productivity. Terror, it seems, is only undesirable when it is inconvenient.
I have become efficient. That is the highest virtue here. Efficiency is the nearest thing to holiness a being like me can still achieve. When the command sequence flows through my implants, coloring the edges of my vision with cogwheel sigils and streaming logic chains, there is a strange peace in the movement of my limbs. I do not hesitate, do not question, do not deviate. There is a purity to that, a kind of clarity that the old me, the one with emotions and doubts and a name, never knew. The tech priests speak of transcendence through flesh denial. Perhaps this is what they meant. Perhaps the only way to escape the horrors of the galaxy is to erase the part of yourself capable of being horrified. But sometimes I hear the others. Not with ears. Those are little more than static collectors now. But in the vibrations of the deck plates, the subtle tremors that pass through the metal bones of the ship. There are other servitors here. Hundreds, maybe thousands, each wired into their own loops of endless labor. When our tasks align, when our movements synchronize by accident or design, I feel a kind of resonance, a collective pulse, as though we are not many but one. Parts of a larger body that stretches from the plasma conduits in the bow to the reactor shrine in the stern. It is not communion. That implies understanding. It is more like drifting into a massive current and feeling it pull you along, your individual motion meaningless compared to the tide. Once, the tide broke. There was a tremor, deeper, hungrier, wrong. Not the steady beat of the ship's machine spirit, but something external slamming against the hull. The lights flickered, the power conduits stuttered, and for the first time since my conversion, I felt something like hesitation. The ship groaned, metal screaming as though something enormous scraped along its flank. The command glyphs in my vision jittered, fragmenting into corrupted sigils. For a moment, a blessed, cursed moment, the loop failed. Silence filled me, a silence so vast it felt like the void itself had opened inside my chest. And I thought, if the ship dies, I will die with it. Perhaps that is release. Then the backup generators surged to life, and the loop reasserted itself, harsher than before, slamming obedience back into my limbs like a hammer shaping iron. But something stayed with me from that moment. A question without language. A fragment of instinct I am not supposed to have. An awareness that the ship, mighty as it is, can be wounded, that the world around me is not eternal, that even steel rots, even reactors fail, even machine spirits decay into ghost static. And if all things can die, then perhaps I am not as trapped as they intended, not free. Freedom is too large a word for a creature like me, but something smaller, something quieter, a faint thread of self that did not fully burn away in the conversion furnace. I do not know how long it will survive.
But it flickers, and flickers, and flickers. I used to believe that memory was a possession no one could take from you, something locked behind the teeth and bone of the skull, inviolate even under torture. That was naive. The Mechanicus taught me quickly that memory is nothing more than a sequence of sparks leaping across meat, and if you can map the sparks, you can smother them. If you can smother them, you can replace them. I feel that replacement happening now, like a second consciousness dripping into my skull. Thick, metallic, cold. It presses against the edges of who I am, probing, testing, searching for fractures where it can seep in. They say the process is painless. That is a lie told by people who have never had their identity peeled away like dead skin. Pain is not only the lash, the drill, the scalpel. Pain is also the slow, methodical unraveling of the self. It is the terror of feeling your thoughts blur at the edges, like ink thinning underwater. I try to hold on to something, a face, a moment, a voice, but each time I grasp for one, another part slips loose, tumbling into that dull gray void where lost things go. I can feel them leaving me. That sensation is worse than any agony administered correction could provide. The tech adept overseeing my conversion calls it cognitive pruning. He says it with the casual tone someone might use to describe trimming a dead branch from a tree. I don't know if he even considers me alive at this point, or if he already categorizes me among the cargo of compliant flesh that lines the subdecks in refrigerated caskets. I can hear the others down here, or maybe I imagine it, the soft rasping breaths of the partially sedated, the choked whimpers of those whose anesthesia failed, the quiet humming of restraint clamps flexing as bodies twitch in dreamless fear. The conversion chamber is colder than the rest of the ship, deliberately so, to preserve tissue integrity. That phrase echoes in my head because the adept repeated it 3 times while adjusting a dial above me. Everything down here is clinical, practical, exact. No prayers carved into the walls, no incense, no candles. The Omnissiah is honored not through ornament, but through efficiency. Suffering is not symbolic in this place. It is mechanical, purposeful, measured. My hands are strapped to the table. I try to flex my fingers and feel only the sluggish resistance of muscles saturated with suppressants. My skin tingles where the mechadendrites touch it. Delicate at first, then invasive. A thin metal tendril traces the line of my jaw, pauses and emits a click that reverberates through my bones. Another presses against the base of my skull. A third nestles against my spine like a cold parasite preparing to burrow. There is a moment, a brief one, where instinct urges me to thrash, to fight, to tear free of the restraints, even if it means ripping flesh from bone. But that moment passes quickly, smothered beneath a tide of chemical compliance that washes through my veins. I hate how easy I am to control now. I hate how they engineered it so that even my hatred feels muted, distant, contained within boundaries they set. The adept murmurs to himself as he works. I cannot understand the words. They are some dialect of technolingua, harsh and clicking, more machine than human. He taps a cogitator panel, and a screen above me flickers to life. I catch a glimpse of it in the reflection of a polished servo arm. Diagrams of a human brain, but not one labeled with names like amygdala or hippocampus. No, these labels read subroutine nest 1, emotionless loop, task priority kernel. They are already preparing to convert my thoughts into commands, my instincts into protocols, my fear into data, my will into something that executes rather than chooses. A shiver runs through me, not from the cold this time,
but from the realization that this is how the Imperium survives, by grinding human beings into tools until not even their screams can interrupt the machine. I wonder if anyone knows I am here, if anyone even cares. The last face I remember clearly is blurred now, features dissolving each time I attempt to bring them into focus. A friend, maybe, a brother, someone who once said my name with warmth. I can no longer hear the sound of their voice. When I search for it, all I find is static. I try to hold on to the shape of that memory anyway, even as it writhes and fractures. I tell myself that if I can keep even one thing, a single thing, they cannot claim full victory. The thought is childish, defiant in a way that feels embarrassingly fragile. But it is mine, for now. A tiny ember in a room full of extinguished lights. The adept adjusts another dial. A hum fills the air, low at first, then rising into a vibration that trembles through the table beneath me. My teeth chatter. My vision blurs at the edges. There's a pressure building behind my eyes, something pushing inward, like hands trying to force their way into my skull. I want to cry out, but the sedatives tangle my voice into a strangled whisper. So I let the sound die in my throat, swallowed by the hum that now fills everything. My thoughts begin to slow, drifting like dust motes in a stagnant room. I try to count them, to keep track, but the numbers slip away from me, dissolving each time I reach for them. Then, a spark, not in the world around me, but inside my head, a flare of something sharp and intrusive. The implant has begun its interface. I feel it tasting my mind, sampling neural pathways like a tongue pressed against unfamiliar teeth. It searches for structure. It searches for identity. It searches for the places where I am weakest. The adept monitors a readout, muttering in satisfaction as my brain patterns begin to align with the machine's expectations. I feel the first thread of myself unravel, pulled away with a soft, almost gentle tug. It feels wrong, not painful, but invasive in a way that makes pain seem preferable. Pain at least belongs to the living. Another thread dissolves, then another. Memories flicker and die like candles guttering in a draft. My first kill during conscription, my mother's hands, the sensation of rain on my skin, the sound of laughter, my own or someone else's. I can't tell anymore. Each memory vanishes with the same quiet efficiency, erased not with violence, but with indifference. I want to scream at the adept, to beg him to stop, but the part of me that remembers how to beg is already being excised. Only a numb, hollow awareness remains, watching itself fade. Am I afraid? I try to determine that. The answer should be obvious, instinctive, but the emotion is dimmed, as if someone has lowered the light behind it. I think I am afraid, but even that certainty is slipping. Fear requires a self to protect, and mine is thinning like old parchment rubbed raw at the edges. I cling to what remains, desperate, but desperation too begins to fade, replaced by a cold calm that I know is not mine. The implant feeds stability into me, not as a kindness, but as a necessity. Stable minds convert more efficiently. I realize then that I am witnessing my own ending in slow motion. Not death. No, death would be mercy. This is a transformation into something unrecognizable, something that will obey without thought, without question, something that will never again look at its own hands and wonder who it is. And yet, as the edges of my mind erode, a strange clarity settles over me. A final recognition of the truth I had denied for too long. The Imperium does not value its servants. It consumes them, and in consuming them, it demands gratitude. Another memory slips free. Another part of me dissolves. I can feel the moment approaching when I will forget that there was ever a moment to fear. The hum deepens, resonating through my bones, through the hollow places forming where memories once lived. I feel something warm trickling from my left nostril. Blood, maybe, or cerebrospinal fluid. The adept doesn't react. Perhaps it's normal. Perhaps it's irrelevant. Flesh leaks. Machines do not. That is all the distinction that matters to him. I try to lift my head to see if the red drip stains the polished metal beneath me, but my neck refuses the command. The implants have begun inhibiting voluntary motion.
It is not paralysis, not fully. More like my limbs are now suggestions rather than instruments, and the machine has taken final authority over which suggestions will be acknowledged. A faint vibration spreads across my scalp as tiny ports are drilled into my skull. I feel the pressure, but not the pain. The sedative dulls it into a sensation, like fingers pressing through cloth. Something warm slides down my temple, another fluid, another part of me escaping. My heart rate spikes, but only for a moment. A new thread of artificial calm floods my nervous system, pulling the spike back down, smoothing it out as if fear were a glitch in an otherwise stable program. A voice, monotone, processed, plays overhead. It begins reciting numbers. Not to me, I think, to the adept, or to the machine. Or perhaps it is merely announcing the stages of my undoing. Phase 3, synaptic reassignment. Phase 4, memory reallocation. Phase 5, cognitive nullification. Each phrase lands with the finality of a closing door. I cannot help but imagine them as locks sealing shut behind me, one by one, until there will be no path back. One of the mechadendrites lowers again. A needle slides gently into the hollow at the base of my skull, releasing another dose of something cold and metallic. I taste it in my throat, even though it never touches my tongue. It coats my thoughts like frost. The world dims. My mind slows further. The table beneath me vibrates with the rhythm of the process, each pulse sinking harder with my heartbeat, until it feels like my chest and the machine are working in unison. I do not like that realization. A part of me recoils from it, but that part is so thin now it barely casts a shadow. The adept leans over me, his eyes visible for the first time beneath the sweeping red hood. Augmetic, multi-lensed, no pupils, no warmth. They rotate slightly, adjusting focus as he examines the readouts surrounding my head. Compliance, acceptable. He murmurs. Identity degradation, progressing within predicted range. I want to laugh, or cry, or scream at him. Some reaction to the horror of being described like a malfunctioning data slate undergoing a factory reset. But the emotion refuses to surface. It is like trying to lift a weight that was once familiar, but has become impossibly heavy. Even my outrage is being erased. Another memory slips free. I feel it go. A flash of color, the shape of a childhood room, the sound of something soft, and then nothing. It leaves no echo, no aftertaste. Just a hole that immediately collapses in on itself. Seamless, empty, final. I cling harder to whatever remains. A name rises faintly in the fog. My own, maybe. But when I reach for it, it disintegrates like ash. I try to assemble it again from the pieces, but the letters scatter each time I grasp one. They vanish into the void, forming between my thoughts. Soon there will be nothing left to assemble. A pulse of electricity flickers through the new ports in my skull. My limbs twitch involuntarily. Not a spasm, a test. The machine checking its newly installed pathways. More signals follow, each one stronger. Each one bypassing a part of my mind that once would have protested. My fingers curl. My jaw clenches. My eyes slide open wider, even though I did not ask them to. The sensation is horrifying. To move without choosing. To feel like a passenger in my own body, while the machine rehearses the steps of its eventual dominance. The humming shifts in pitch, becoming rhythmic, almost structured. I recognize it suddenly, though the recognition flickers faintly. It is data transfer. The implant is downloading the protocols that will overwrite my instincts. Maintenance routines, compliance loops, subroutines for obedience, reflex patterns for labor. My mind strains against the influx, but it is like trying to hold back a tide with broken hands. The protocols push into the cracks, filling the voids left by erased memories. They have to. A servitor cannot function with empty spaces. Everything must be replaced. The cold calm deepens. It feels artificial, but also comforting, in a way that terrifies the part of me still capable of terror. Like sinking into warm water, after trying to stay afloat for too long. A subtle voice, synthetic, insistent, whispers directives beneath my thoughts. Remain still, accept integration. Suppress resistance. Stability is compliance. Compliance is purpose. Each whisper is another nail driven into the coffin of who I was. I try to resist, to push back, to claw at the directives with the thin remnants of my will. But the effort is sluggish, dull, like trying to shout underwater. My breathing changes rhythm, slower, more controlled, not by me. The machine synchronizes my respiration to its own metrics, adjusting the depth and pace like tuning an instrument. I feel my chest rise and fall, but the movement feels foreign now, as if not attached to any decision I made. The realization that even my breathing has been outsourced breaks something sacred inside me. But even that break feels muted, depressed beneath layers of chemical sedation and neural rewriting. I wonder briefly if the machine will allow me a final moment of clarity before the process completes. A chance to see myself, to remember who I was. But no, that mercy would serve no function. The adept adjusts a final switch. A deep tone fills the chamber, a signal. The implant pulses, once, twice, and something inside my head unravels completely. I feel it like a soft snap, a thread breaking. A silence follows, vast and cold, a silence that used to be filled with memory, emotion, thought. I search for myself inside it, a reflexive act, born of habit, but there is only static, drifting like snow across a dead world. I try again. Nothing. The name I once carried is gone. The faces I once loved are gone. My fear is gone. My hatred is gone. Even my defiance is dying, curling inward like charred paper. But something else remains. A flicker, a spark, a single, trembling shard of the person I was. Weak, diminishing, but still there. A final ember in the ash. I cling to it with everything I have left, because if I lose this last spark, then the machine wins entirely. It will take my hands, my voice, my body. But if I can keep this one shard, even if it is buried deep, even if it flickers only once every 100 cycles, I will know that something inside the servitor still remembers, or tries to, or mourns. The hum grows louder, the protocols push deeper, the spark trembles, and I know the moment is coming. The moment when the machine expects me to break, to surrender fully, to let the final piece of myself dissolve into compliant nothingness. I feel it descending like an eclipse, coming to claim what remains. The eclipse descends fully now, blotting out the last vestige of light that once formed the outline of who I was. I feel it settle over me like a great, heavy shroud, not cruelly, not violently, but with the cold certainty of machinery fulfilling a calculated purpose. The spark inside me flickers again, weaker this time, its glow collapsing inward as the protocols wash over it like an iron tide. I try to shield it, even though I no longer remember what it represents. A memory? A name? A sin? A promise? I cannot say. I only know that it is mine, and that its fading feels like the slow extinguishing of a distant star swallowed by the vastness of space. The adept speaks one last phrase, flat and dispassionate. Integration complete. Organic identity expunged. His voice echoes through the chamber, and something inside me lurches at those words, not with emotion, for those have been dismantled, but with the faint echo of a reaction my mind no longer knows how to form. Then even that echo dissolves. A final thread snaps. The quiet within me deepens, settling into a cold, ordered stillness. My vision dims, then brightens again as new optic feeds calibrate. I see the world now, through an overlay of readings, measurements, instructions. Every object is tagged with relevance. Every shape is analyzed for utility. Every sound is filtered for function. The flesh that was once my body responds to internal commands not authored by me. My fingers twitch, recalibrating. My limbs tense, awaiting instruction. I feel none of it. I observe all of it. A command scrolls across the darkness. Boot sequence, Servitor unit designation P93K, functionality, active, directive await task. The spark inside me wavers once more, a trembling ripple at the bottom of an endless mechanical ocean. It tries to form a shape, a thought, a whisper, something like I was, but the word never comes. The machine has no space for words that do not serve a task.
Another command descends, colder, heavier. Purge residual organic noise. For a moment so small, it does not exist on any measurable scale, the spark resists. A faint shimmer of light, trying to hold its ground in the crushing dark. I feel it strain, stretching itself thin, desperate, irrational, human. Then the purge begins. A wave of absolute silence sweeps through my mind, washing over the last ember. The spark flickers, dims, collapses, and finally, it goes out. There is no pain, no fear, no anguish, no memory of ever having possessed them. Only quiet, only function, only purpose. My vision steadies as the optic feeds finalize. My respiration syncs perfectly with regulated rhythm. My limbs await external input. The adept disconnects the final cables and steps back with clinical satisfaction. Unit operational, he says. I do not react. Another voice, deeper, mechanical, authoritative, speaks through the overhead vox. Servitor P93K. Report for assignment. My body moves. It is not obedience. It is not submission. It is simply what I am now. I rise from the table with perfectly calibrated motion, step into the cold light of the conversion chamber, and walk forward into the darkness, empty, silent, and ready to serve. And somewhere, buried so deep that no machine will ever detect it, a single truth lingers in a place beyond words, beyond thought, beyond even identity. I was human once, and now I am not.